Mr. Matthew Bunza and Mr. Shun Kanda. Mr. Matthew Bunza is a lecturer in architecture at MIT, and Mr. Shun Kanda is a faculty member at the architecture department at MIT, and they'll both be speaking about the MIT Japan 311 initiative.
Okay, thank you so much for having us. I'm Matthew Bunza. My colleague Shun Kanda and I are both splitting 20 minutes, so I'm going to try to be very brief and give you basically an overview of some of the projects and let's say the scope of the projects that the MIT Japan 311 initiative has done. So let's call those facts. And then I hope to talk a little bit about some of my interest in the project, why I'm involved. So the what and why, starting with the what. So after 311, the MIT Japan 311 initiative began with an invitation from two individuals in Minamisanriku. On the left is the mayor of Minamisanriku, Jin Seto, and then a professor at Miyagi University who basically sent a message to Shun Kanda and asked for his assistance and the resources of MIT and students there in potential help from Minamisanriku. So all the projects that the MIT Japan 311 initiative has been working on basically are focused in this area, even though they're in several different locations. So I'm going to skim all these things, but the projects relate to, let's say, across multiple fields, multiple scales. So initially it was urban planning, transportation, hazards, and research that was basically trying to do what we call rapid visual site analysis to expand the scope of possibility immediately after the disaster. This was the summer of 2011. There's been work involved in looking at the landscape and ecology, water systems, coastal ecology, aquaculture, productive and preserved landscapes. And architecturally, we're both from the Department of Architecture, so certainly one of the core responses that we've been working on has been architecture at all scales. So on the top left, what we call seed projects, which might be as simple as a roof and a table, to on the bottom left, more kind of still small scale but built pavilions that are trying to be catalysts for community activation, to other let's say larger scale, more longer range projects, some of which by students that are actually in the audience right now. Then the MIT Media Lab has been involved looking at new methods of mobility and technology for resilient cities. And then the MIT program in art, culture, and technology has also been a component of the MIT Japan 311 initiative. So just because of the theme of the symposium, I hope to talk a little bit about some of these courses, which I was involved in teaching a little bit with another professor named Jigen Vincent Paul, who's now working with Ai Weiwei in Beijing. So again, I'm skimming, I'll be very brief, but these are student projects. This one is a student who was basically trying to understand the notion of disaster through artifacts. So she was given this film strip that one of the local men had found, and she was basically, these were indistinguishable. There was no images on there, but she was trying to basically create a dialogue through emails, through posts on a blog, to try to find people that might know where this came from. Another student who was a Korean was interested in the activation of the debris. So how do you take something that is about, let's say, decay and lack of life and turn it into something that is completely the opposite? So he was basically interested in sampling sounds both of the debris of the landscape there and then creating an interactive display that was both online and also put into an installation in Tokyo and in Boston. Another student who was from more of a political science and law background was interested in looking at how disaster can affect the kind of changing political relations between countries. So she was looking at disputed territories, the islands between Japan and Korea. And then this last project by a student named Samira Thomas, I think is another good example. And it's called Project Post. And what she was interested in was helping and working with the children there. So you think of a lot of the aid responses, and these are all people at MIT. So myself, all these people, were outsiders in a way. But she was interested in challenging the kind of one-way flow of aid and working with children. So in her past, before she was a student at MIT, she worked in Kabul in Afghanistan, working with children there. So this project, and this was all just within one semester, and there are a few of many, was basically trying to connect students in Afghanistan who were also, let's say, familiar with disaster, albeit it's about warfare in a different kind, with the children of Minamisanriku. So she went there, she went to Afghanistan, and then basically began these stories and these interactive kind of sessions in the classrooms that, and I think this is still ongoing, that we're connecting them. So I want to talk a little bit about why, and again, I'm going to be very brief, but this distance is basically 7,000 miles. So why are we here in the East Coast, and why do we care about these things? And again, especially as outsiders in some way. So for me, if I can just speak from my own personal, let's say, relationship with these issues, beyond the distance, my home, which I should say is that little dot in the middle in Oregon. There's differences but commonalities, and if I'm just one example, we share an ocean, we share the fact that we're on a continental plate. Even the landscapes and the flows in these places, this is Minamisanriku on the left, and the landscapes, let's say, of my youth in Oregon, it's not so dissimilar. And the livelihoods in these places, both in Oregon and in Japan, are in relation to fishing, tourism, forestry, all the same things. And when you see recently in the news that the debris, is basically turning up on the shore, you're reminded that the issues that are happening in this place are really, they're global, both physically and not, I think. So this is kind of what this is my last slide, but this is kind of what I take from this, and I offer, both as maybe an insight that I've been learning about, but also a question. What is the role of the outsider? So if you take let's say a cross-section of any of the classes at MIT, you'll see courses focused on socio-political issues, shrinking cities, the environment, sustainability, water, energy, technology, all of these things. And in Minamisanriku and elsewhere in Tohoku, you can find these things in every one of those places. So they're not just local issues in Tohoku, but they relate to us globally, both as, let's say, kind of microcosm, but also as somewhat of a canary. So I think that's the kind of interest. So those projects by the 4 students were basically trying to look at dialogue. It's not a one-way thing, it's a two-way thing. It's a back and forth. So Shun is going to talk about more of the kind of larger issues and the other focus of the 311 initiative, but I think that one thing I should mention is that I'm in some way representative of one of the students, because I started as a student and was a teaching assistant with these issues, and then did my thesis on it and am now teaching. But for each one of these students, as far as what we hope to bring beyond the symposium, these things relate to all these people. So I think that the role of creative response and dialogue is the kind of key thing here. Sometimes trying to ask the right questions versus solving these enormous issues are just as powerful. So I'll leave it to Shun.
I have to once again thank the organization and allowing us from Boston to be admitted into New York. It's a real honor and privilege. And I think we are connected, and we would like to think of this today as a new way to really expand the northeast of the US to the northeast of Japan. The MIT 311 initiative at MIT, on March 14th, the president of MIT convened us together to a meeting that said, what can MIT as a community do for Tohoku? And among the discussions that evolved, the so-called, I being a member of the School of Architecture and Planning, and others in political science and so on, decided that what we can do, we need to pinpoint to some location, which eventually became Minamisanriku. And we set out with 2 goals, very explicit two goals, early as it was at that time. One would be trying to see if we can actually propagate community centers, places where people could gather outside the privacy of their homes. We knew that was lacking. We knew there was no funding for that. And the second objective would be an educational base, which would be, as educators, as an educational institution, how we could actually try to assist, hopefully, the youth, the younger generation coming forth. So I've titled this the 311 Beyond with the NX as the next generation, which is the real concern, I think, that has to actually continue into the recovery program. And the 2 past years, what we have accomplished so far is very small, but relative to the community center, we've been able to construct 2 very small seed projects. And per education, what we've tried to do is through a lot of workshops and seminars, cross-cultural, cross-national boundaries. We probably invited up to 50 people, students from both Japan and the US, to actually be on the site, trying to work with students local from Miyagi as well as from Japan. So that's the intent of the MIT 311 initiative. Also, having spent now 2 years, it has forced at least me personally to take a step back and see of all the things that many people have been contributing, assisting. It does say that after 2 years we need to step back and say, is what we're doing appropriate? Is what we see in front of our eyes that is going on in the right direction and so on? We also are very aware, as Dr. Homa also said initially, that we are from the outside, and that should be a very unique way of contributing as opposed to those who are within the country, within Japan. Despite the fact that I'm Japanese, I always say I just flew over, just to make sure that there's boundaries crossed. It's another way of saying, how do you actually introduce thinking outside the box, is to say, I'm from outside. So that's a strategic kind of way to introduce ourselves as to the question, why are you here? Which is often asked. So we all know what happened on 311, but again, in retrospect, in a fairly sort of thoughtful way, I just began to narrow in on one aspect, which was actually probably quite well known to many people, but somehow not really focused on. And that has to do with the fact that if you take one town, which is Shizugawa, in Minamisanriku, the middle picture here with the pink area, which is the inundated area of the town, 90% totally destroyed. That's the inundation area. Average tide tsunami was about 50 meters, 15.9 meters. And I happened to come upon this map, freehand map on the left, which is from the Edo period, 1600, 400 years ago. And it doesn't take much to find out that the exact boundary of the former bay is where the flood actually also occurred. So almost line to line. And it's not a very profound aha moment. It's like, of course, something must have been there. Meaning, all the past 400 years has been essentially man reaching towards, pushing to the water landfill, and essentially expanding the territory for livability, for convenience to work. And of course, you go back to the Jomon period, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 years ago. This whole area, which is the Rias coastline of Tohoku, was basically water. And the landscape is formed by the erosion of the land. So these are not volcanically formed land areas, they're land masses. They're actually from the riverines coming out to the bay. So something says, if you talk to the older people, they say, we've seen this before. Not just by tsunami, we've seen our grandparents talk about the fact that when it was back then, when it was a bay. Then the obvious question is, how do we think about this place 30, 40, 50 years from now? Which is not too far away, 2050. Most of the people in this room will probably be my age or younger. It's one generation away. And of all the funding from the central government, all the projects underway, we don't really, at least I don't seem to notice any mention of what is the form, what is the nature of the place one generation from now. And that's the kind of thinking where, as an outsider, we get that perspective. As I fly in from 10,000 feet above the air, visiting the site, it occurs to me, what's the form in the next generation? So this is just a sketch of what if we were to return to that setting. Today, 2 years hence, this is a striking picture of the town of Shizugawa area, where of course now it is illegal to have housing at ground zero. So the area that was inundated, nobody is supposed to live there by law, except for commercial, except for recreational, fisheries, parks, recreation, but there ought not to be residences at that low elevation. And the lower picture says it actually has perished. So we have a unique question as planners, architects, as people who have to actually think about the next generation. What is the issue to us, which is kind of we're not familiar to this. It's not like the Kobe earthquake, where the whole agenda is to rebuild what was there. In Tohoku, in Minamisanriku, the agenda is not about rebuilding what was the past. You cannot rebuild the past. It's a sad fact, but plain as day, if you are not to lose any more lives, then you cannot live nor construct a town, a community at that level. So the main street, main shopping street is not to come about, not in this form. The so-called activity that was very polyculture, the fishermen, the schools, the railroads, all of this that happened in the one concentrated area will not happen, at least at the same location. So the problem is, what's the location? Where is it going to happen next, in the next generation? What's the form of the community? And nobody seems to be asking this question, because the next few slides I'll show you what is actually taking place in front of our eyes. If you were to visit there today, yesterday, what is actually taking place. And this is, for us here, it's also the situation that the residents, the survivors of the disaster are faced with. What is tomorrow's life going to be? In the meantime, this is what you see if you were to visit. This is the amazing amount of allocation that is pumped into this area along with other places in Tohoku. This is a diagram of what the government will do in certain color, what the prefecture will do, what the town will do. Primarily infrastructural expenses, infrastructural construction, and they're very large scale. If you go there, you'll be probably caught in a traffic jam of trucks, cement cars. The local sort of inns and bed and breakfasts, you cannot get a reservation because they're full of, booked up by the contractors. So where did the people go? And what is this about? What is this reconstruction about that you see in this diagram? Because we don't have a town here anymore. So what is it that's being built? And this is, some of the pictures are from as recent as January. But the main categories I put down here is major highway reconstruction. Then there's housing issues. The Japan Rail is on a standstill. It may not come back. And the big question about how do you protect the inland area with seawalls. The highway, as you can see, this is Highway 45, National Highway 45, constructed in 1974, only about 40 years ago. And this is what happened. Today already, they're rebuilding it. Very fast. Budget available. Japanese are known for very efficient construction, maximum speed. This is underway. Don't ask why, it's underway. Housing, temporary housing. As you see, many of these parallel anonymous housing, they are being given the option that if you were to relocate to a permanent housing, you need to go higher ground. So this is a subsidized program where from here you get to go somewhere high, but they don't know where to go. The family is split. The older generation wants to stay in view of the sea. The younger generation wants safety, so they would like to go up high. You need a car to live up there. You don't have the town anymore. And despite all the questioning, this is going on. So the mountains are being carved for the relocation. And then the seawall. This is a demonstration of, that top is 8.4 meters high. So this area, the plan is to actually build up the seawall that high. So 8.4 meters. So this is probably just about 8.4 meters. That's a very high wall. And then there'll be a new highway at 4 meters. So this is going on. So this is what is going on. And not so much from outside, but also the local people are faced with what do you want to do? Which decision do you want to make? So they're very pressed for decisions without really knowing exactly what are the best options. If you go there today, essentially Shizugawa town is quite like a desert. It's very clean, free of debris, and the local hotel tour people say, well, the tourists are not going to come anymore because there's no disaster to see anymore. So it's a very bleak sight. The night is still very dark. And I had to pause around last fall, early this year, and say, we've got to think about this. We have to think about what is happening, see if we can bring a different kind of angle to this. So instead of saying 3 proposals, I've taken the attitude of saying these are 3 insights that I see. And the 3 insights consist of the first one being the rising sea, global warming, subsidence of the ground. So is there a new ecology to return? It's actually not new, it's a revival of the ecology of ground zero. What I call scaling new ground, we have to live higher than 0 meters. And then the third one is the most insidious one, most important one, which is looking ahead, what's the form of the community that would have very diminished population, 40% of who are going to be elderly. So the first one is essentially a sketch of the same town that used to be returning to a bay, but then with it, of course, not just a scenic bay, but a new economy, perhaps based on estuarian fish farming, shrimp farming, and so on. Natural sanctuaries, habitat, and that we cannot live there anymore, so why not basically try to return that to the ecological base. Number 2 is to say some of the houses did survive. Some of the houses did survive, as you can see, if it was above 50 meters, if it was above 20 meters. So is there a possibility to reconstruct a whole new level that's at that level, which would unite the town, the next evolution of the town? And the left-hand top shows a transportation diagram, which is a very large topic, to say, given the next 20, 30 years, perhaps the whole transportation system has to be rethought. So given areas of formation which are like fingers, and the bays are very deep, it's probably not wise to build a highway tying these peninsulas, but to actually go inland, and then these local ones can be tied together with local transportation, smart cars, slower cars, that already exist, by the way. And then the third one, which is the most important, as I say, and through this thinking about the year 2050, the Shizugawa that I've been showing you, probably the population will be about 5,000 people. So all of that construction that you saw earlier is for 5,000 people. And there's a mismatch there. There's a disconnect of scale. And probably so-called shopping center or shopping street will not return because there's fragmentation, there's scattering, dispersal of housing. They're all fragmented throughout the area. The thing about Tohoku is that there's a lot of land. So the first temptation is to disperse. Whereas the villages used to be within the dispersal, also very contained, very close to the bay. So now they're headed for a very different paradigm. And in a way, what we're trying to say is we won't probably be able to reconstruct the shopping streets. The mega malls probably will be not attracted to this area for their profit making. So one of the thoughts that we're coming up with is that it's probably what we call a minna no butai, everyone's stage, a place where people can gather And to that extent, going back to the first agenda that we had, which was the building of community centers, this essentially is capitalizing on the street, in this case the alley between temporary housing, and just by providing a bench, shelter, temporary place for people to come out, at least it creates a third place between the very privacy or the workplace to come and actually convene. And this is the kind of thing that eventually what architecture begins to bring about is not the building itself, but how to get the people to come out and at least begin to have conversation among each other. This is the second project we were able to do, which really is essentially just a shelter with a very large veranda and endai. And as you can see here, the architecture becomes basically a vehicle for people's voice to be heard among each other. And otherwise, they're really inside their own homes, temporary housing. And what began as a place for just several elderly people on the left sitting down, today, if you go, it has men sitting there, visitors coming, their children doing their homeworks on the veranda. And this pavilion was to have a door and window and shutters. We ran out of money. This was built in 6 days. We ran out of time. We said we'll come back next spring and finish the project. We went back and they said, we don't want doors, we don't want windows. We want it open so that it's open access. And to me, this is the perfect example, like the performers to the stage, the actors in the stage are the residents, the local people. And there has to be a place where people can actually come, so that one of the largest things that most people recognize is the need for community to actually express themselves, the need for community to be heard. But usually that doesn't take place in an official meeting at town hall. Anything formal is not where it happens. It has to happen when you have a drink on one hand and worked at the end after the day's work, and where 3 generations come together. And there has to be a pretext for people to come together. It used to be shopping and markets and so on. It used to be temples and shrines. But now I think we're trying to find a way to combine the temple, the shrine, sort of the street, where people can happen to come along. And what was amazing in the 6 days of construction is, like, she's an 80-year-old lady. This is a community leader, and they're helping us plant a tree. So what started as a very seed, very humble, small project, essentially became a vehicle for everybody to pitch in, including people from Tokyo, volunteers. But the best thing that happened is that the residents themselves came, and what is sustained is that it's being used, and it's used without our presence. It's used hopefully where they can actually come in and laugh and complain and begin to really slowly talk about what their future is. And I think that's what we can do. That's what designers and architects can do. So part of the thing is that we're trying to build a few more. There's one coming this fall, which would be a permanent place. And we're all calling this Popolo, Popolo, and everyone's stage. So back to what we can do 2013 and beyond is twofold. Going back to our education initiative, which is to promote many more of these exchange programs with the next generation of Japan, university, high school students, through our workshops. Some of the members of these past workshops are present in this audience today. And to help to build the so-called, I've lost the term community center. It sounds too formal. Anything called a center is dubious. So that's why we're trying to say it's a stage. We're just providing a very generous cover, a roof, and a platform, and the rest should be open, wide open, and for free access. But all of these require a lot of energy, a lot of funding, and a lot of trips back and forth. I've basically spent 9 months in the area last year. This year I have to slow down and spend more time with my class here and a few other responsibilities back home. But that's what's going on. And just a few more slides. I'm over time. You're saying stop. It's very hard to talk about 2 years' work and beyond in a straight time. But, so here are examples of the fact that there's so many people that converge, that energize this whole relief and recovery effort. And the key again is how to really immerse ourselves into the grain of the local people, into the realities of what is there. And I just show you a few more things in this picture which are not Minamisanriku, but there's some other parts of Japan. This Japan program has been going on since 1990, and that's an element what I've called always slow disaster happening in the regions of Japan. What happened on 3/11/2011 was a very urgent disaster, a very sudden disaster. But our efforts through the Japan program every summer has been to address the slow disaster, which I see happening, which everybody knows is happening, and now aggravated by Tohoku, but also the realities of the declining population, the low childbirth, aging population. All of that is becoming a real factor, and somewhere we need to address this within that large understanding, but also day-to-day build small things as much as we can. I've been fortunate, having spent time on the ground, to come across a real cross-section of the local people. And this is the most important one. I spend time with politicians and also folks in Tokyo, but we don't have access to these people. And I think what our role can be, those of us who can be bilingual especially, is to become the voice of the people. And I think that many of you know Tohoku people are very reticent, they're very stoic, they're very strong, but they don't complain very much. So we have to get them out in the open through these so-called minna no butai, everybody's stage, and really make this conversation happen. And we are the interpreters. We carry the message back to New York, back to Boston. And somewhere in there, Tokyo comes in, hope you're listening. But that's the story of the MIT 311 Japan workshop. I'm sorry to be rushing through. And again, I appreciate being admitted to this circle in New York. It's a very nice afternoon for us. Thank you very much.